Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jide, and today I'm here at Catford in southeast London, where this month marks 40 years since one of the biggest demonstrations, in the history of South London, which is the Battle of Lewisham. And joining me here today to discuss not only the Battle of Lewisham, but also other events which may have followed it years later, is Barbara Gray. Barbara Gray, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to come along.
Right, thank you very much for speaking to me. I wanted to ask you, uh, what what can you be able to tell me, and to anyone listening to this as well, about the Battle of Lewisham. What do you know about it? Do you know anything that actually happened on the day or anything like that?
No, I don't know anything about the Battle of Lewisham as of thinking about back in that time, and I think what happened in Lewisham was quite different in that sense, in terms of having a run-in with the National Front to what was happening in Wandsworth, because I don't remember that, but I do remember thinking about Lewisham when they had the New Cross fire, so I can't remember the date of that. And that was absolutely shocking because I was most definitely a teenager. The young people that would have been caught up in that fire were my age. And like I said, we had our own house parties because that's where we had to go and listen to our music and create our own discos as they were our guests. And it was quite shocking because we were all quite worried, really, thinking, well, that's our only release at the end of the week from everything else that's going on. And in the back of our mind, every time we went out, we had to think, well, is somebody going to post something through the letterbox that's going to set us on fire? So I think we kind of thought of Lewisham as a bit of a strange place where something quite horrific like that could happen. But at that time, I think I just started to work for an organisation called International Personnel, and it was part of the Martin Luther King Foundation that was set up to help young black people into employment, because at that time it wasn't that straightforward unless you wanted to do the sort of basic menial job for the basic wage. So there was a lot of discussion in that organisation about what was going on there, and a lot of community activists were coming together about it. So that was my view of Lewisham, of thinking, wow, this is a place where you don't quite know what's going to happen, and the racial tension is turning into actual physical violence for us. So it's not a place I really wanted to come to. So I stayed in southwest London, or in Hackney.
Do you believe that relations between the public and the police, were they strained, or what were they like?
I think they were very strained at different levels. So on a day-to-day level, living and growing up, you had a British population that really weren't prepared for so many people coming from the Caribbean to come to Britain. And what they hadn't realised was that, people like the Department of Transport had actually gone and set up a recruitment desk in Barbados to recruit people and to pay for their fares to come here. And similar for the Caribbean, for other islands, the NHS did exactly the same thing. So they saw all these people coming, the people who lived here, and this is their country, and had no real understanding of why all these people were coming in such large numbers, and they just weren't prepared for it. So, on the one hand, some people were, accepted it for what it needed to be, but I think for many people they were really quite shocked. I mean, in the 1970s, there's a picture of me, which is well known, where I'm standing outside where I work. And on it they've got Keep Britain White, because it's the International Personnel, which is an organisation set up to find, as I say, work for young black people. So, here we are in the heart of an area of Balham. No, we weren't attacked or anybody, but that's the sort of stuff that would happen. So it was so there was clearly tension in society, but when you're a teenager, I wasn't politically involved, so I really didn't I just accepted it as a part of life, because racism was a part of my upbringing, being called all kinds of awful names and just being excluded from, like I say, mainstream music, all the kind of things that people took for granted. I wasn't. And I think also policy level, because now I've worked in policy myself, and you look back at the policy and the statistics, they make it quite clear that when people were brought here, the government made no provision for all these people that were going to come. So when you've got people sleeping in phone boxes or sharing beds and all the stuff they talk about with Polish immigrants now, it's all the same. I thought, wow, what's happening?
What are your thoughts on, institutional racism, generally here in the capital?
Well, I think, institutionalised racism you have to go right back to industrialised Britain, really, I think, to get a sense of what all of that means. And if we think about, people will say, oh, you talk about slavery, but, you think back then, this is like 15 and 1600s, and that was all of the building of industrialised Britain, where people were entrepreneurial, they wanted to make money, there were opportunities out there in that big wide world, and they just went for it. And there was all kinds of legislation, debate and legislation that was put in place to enable those kind of things to happen. And some of that legislation still exists today, which is why you find that following the Stephen Lawrence case, they've had to bring out new legislation to counter that old legislation that stems back from all of those days. And when we've got big institutions and all the buildings you will see going around central London and all those kind of places, even the railways, everything that we have is built on the money that was made by those merchants and everybody who invested in all of those years ago, hundreds of years ago it may be, but it's formed the kind of cornerstone on which things have been built in this country. So, when you've got something that's structurally so deep, it's very hard, even though hundreds and hundreds of years later, to say that suddenly is going to change. And like I say, as the Stephen Lawrence case shows, it takes law and it takes people to come together and say they're unhappy about it. So in that kind of context, of course, Britain, Queen Victoria used to say, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And gradually that's gone down and down and down in terms of countries being independent. But the result of that and the way that that has been done has meant that we're now dealing with the situation that we have in this country. So this country has always relied on people from overseas, from its empire and then later on from its Commonwealth. And then what happens to all these people that span the whole globe, as Queen Victoria's comment shows. So of course you can have people from Africa, from the Caribbean, from Asia. These are huge continents on their own. And they're all looking to Britain because Britain has ruled them for between 200 to 400 years. And the systems in those places you'll go, they're all British, and some of them are still governed over by British systems today. So, I can understand the difficulty in the kind of the policies, the legislation, just the way things are set up. It's just set up for the fact that you are going to have people from different countries and different places coming here to support this country to keep it going. And it changes, so it's gone from slavery to one thing to another, to people like my parents coming over. And now we've got Brexit, which is looking at the whole thing all over again. So as you see, and that's a whole load of legislation, it's going to take them 2 years to even work out how that's going to work. So, it's institutionalised racism. It's the way the country's set up and the way it's had to set up for it to be prosperous, dating back hundreds of years, and for it to continue to be prosperous after Brexit has happened. So it then leaves the people, because what they're looking at is economies, but all of these things are delivered by people, and when people have been moved all over the place, and their whole being and their thoughts of who they are and where they come from has been completely changed, so that Britain's at the heart of it, then ultimately, this is what's going to happen. So, and then you've got the people who were born and have lived all their life as white people in Britain. So, of course, they've benefited from all this industrialisation, so there are certain things they may not have had to do, but they've enjoyed the benefits of having all of this, but not really understanding what it means. And now we are in the 21st century, and the last vote has shown that people are really getting it now, and it's about what we're going to do. So, I think it's ongoing. It's never going to change in the sense that unless they're going to completely, change all legislation and write laws about entrepreneurship, and I mean they're starting to. I think socially, people are kind of saying, well, globalization means that we are going to benefit here, but it impacts on climate change, it impacts on another country where you're getting rid of crops where people can eat to farm beef so we can have McDonald's. That kind of social pressure is on, and I think sort of your generation and my daughter's generation, I'm really delighted at the way that you're kind of moving away from mainstream processes and coming up with your own. So I think, change is already starting to happen, and when Jeremy Corbyn got that last vote, it just goes to show that young people have got a voice. They clearly understand, and I'm just really proud of that. But it's something about my generation who were born here, had expectations here, and we were just thinking, well, you're second generation born here, or even third generation born now, so this is your society and you're part of it. And then, really taking part of that. So, I think things are pushing the legislation or creating other processes instead.
And what was it? Just to almost, briefly, close the interview. Only just got two last questions that I wanted to ask you. First one is, are you a fan of the new Labour leader? And the second one is, do you believe that the Battle of Lewisham should be taught, in schools, like not only mainly here in Lewisham, but in other boroughs such as Lambeth and Southwark, and like across London, for people to remember what it was, and how it shaped the capital during that period.
In terms of politics, I try to keep my politics private. Yeah, but my experience of sort of being born in Brixton and lived in Balham and Battersea and Wandsworth and all those kind of places, and I own Lewisham and all those places, my daughter says to me, why is it everywhere you live seems to be really wildly expensive and you can no longer afford to live there? So, and during my lifetime, we've had Labour politicians, we've had Liberal politicians, we've had Conservative politicians, and I think if you look at the outcomes of our life during those times, it hasn't been significantly different. Some people have helped and we've kind of had a bit of a good time, but it's never been sustainable. So, you work and get the best out of what you can with our politicians. In terms of being taught in schools, I think absolutely. My daughter's 29 and we had a conversation. We went to, there was something at Greenwich Museum last week about remembrance of slavery. And that just opened a huge debate about her life, my parents' life, and just how many gaps there are for her. And she's saying, well, it's all well and good, me looking at things about slavery, and it's interesting, but, I don't even know who my great-grandparents' names are. And I don't know who my grandparents' names are. So for her, I've got books all over the place. So all of a sudden she's come down and taken all these books and she's just reading them. So it just means that she says, well, how can I step forward with a firm foundation if those are very basic things that I don't know? And even when you're looking at things like Jane Austen and Beatrix Potter, and we've got the park down the road there, which has been beautiful grounds, Beckenham Place Parks, and you think, well, where did he invest? And they said the East India Company. I thought, I don't really want to know. Do you know what I mean? And it's just those, it starts to make sense if you have those bits of information filled in. I've been to South Africa, I've been to Soweto, and they had a Soweto museum. And it's not nice, but, it's out there and you're telling people, and you can build in a sustainable way on that. So I think it's really important for our young people to know, and for everybody to know really, because at least then, you can start to, everybody can have their contribution to kind of making it better for everyone really.
Well, I definitely could not agree more, with what you said, and I think a lot of people, will, probably agree with what you've said as well. But Miss Barbara Gray, it was an honour and a pleasure to have spoken to you this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you.